You've heard rumors about soldiers vanishing forever on these missions, but classified leaks and some whistleblowers claim a striking rate of neurological fallout among portal returnees. Figures circulated inside the program are alarming, but never verified publicly. That's the kind of claim that surfaced in the whistleblower interviews released over the last few years. Accounts disputed by officials, but echoed across different testimonies. Whether true or exaggerated, those claims force the program to treat returned personnel like walking hazards, medically monitored, quarantined, and often unwilling to return. And the deeper question is where these conditions are being enforced. Hidden facilities in 2025. In 2025, the program's infrastructure remains one of its most carefully guarded secrets, with whispers of hidden facilities surfacing through contractor leaks and whistleblower accounts. 2 hubs reportedly shut down earlier this year after containment systems failed, setting off alarms that residents in nearby towns confused with unexplained seismic tremors. Officials have not acknowledged these incidents, but according to insiders, the shutdowns suggest persistent engineering and stability problems that contradict the stable entry point branding used for years. Some accounts even claim the sites had been experimenting with experimental alignment systems just before the lockdowns, though such claims remain impossible to verify against any public record. What is clear is that security staff were rapidly reassigned, and equipment was removed under sudden orders that bore all the hallmarks of an emergency response. With those closures, attention has shifted toward other alleged facilities. One recurring claim centers on an installation beneath the Nevada desert. For years, this location was considered dormant, but whistleblower Emery Smith described underground structures and simulator rooms associated with portal operations during interviews. These remarks fuel speculation that the facility may not be as abandoned as the broken windows and collapsing perimeter fences suggest. Satellite images show heat venting from cooling towers and irregular energy footprints that do not align with the visible dereliction above ground. While some researchers argue these anomalies are circumstantial and may come from unrelated industrial equipment, others interpret the data as indirect signs of renewed activity underground. The truth remains contested. Reports of northern European hubs follow a similar pattern. Analysts examining satellite images of Norway have noticed recurring snowmelt patterns around decommissioned radar sites, though official explanations attribute them to shifting subglacial streams. In interviews, former contractors have described carved shafts and reinforced thresholds within mountain facilities, design features said to allow teams to withstand unstable portal environments for extended missions. These descriptions, like those shared by Smith, have never been confirmed by release schematics or independent investigators who could access the locations directly. Yet the consistency of the claims keeps the discussion alive. Observers stress, however, that unauthorized fieldwork has proven almost impossible, given restrictive airspace and the lack of legal access to the mountain sites. Speculation about the global spread of these facilities has long included South America, Antarctica, and Central Asia, but documents tying government expenditures to such locations remain absent. Analysts have tried to track unusual procurement orders or redirected energy grids through public open-source data, such as utility loads and construction shipments. Some patterns appear irregular, especially where infrastructure is overbuilt compared to local civilian demand. Yet no released government contract explicitly connects these anomalies to portal facilities. As a result, researchers emphasize the difference between hard evidence and circumstantial indicators, reminding readers that much of the story relies on inference. The Australian connection, once promoted in online forums, offers a good example. Past claims linked portal research to the desert west of Kalgoorlie, citing unusual fiber optic activity and unmapped drone corridors. However, none of the supporting documents provided any direct tie to portal operations. Without confirmation, such theories remain allegations rather than verified fact. In contrast, what can be said concretely is that global distribution would fit the program's supposed need for redundancy. If one hemisphere suffered a catastrophic breach, others could remain active. But which sites are operating today, and on what scale, still lacks public confirmation. Inside the community of researchers and enthusiasts, disagreement persists about whether activity should be interpreted as growing or shrinking. On the one hand, whistleblowers claim that catastrophic failures shuttered certain hubs permanently. On the other, contractors continue to describe heavy nighttime deliveries to remaining facilities. They speak of coil assemblies, high-capacity generators, and long trains moving beneath cities. Energy mathematics tell their own story. Maintaining even a brief portal requires staggering consumption, potentially enough to light a small city. These claims suggest that instead of contracting after its losses, the network may be consolidating into fewer, but more intensely active nodes. Still, without monitoring instruments inside the sealed complexes, the public has only partial fragments of the operational picture. Observers have also noted the use of deception as a recurring tactic. Several of the most frequently cited sites appear to be abandoned, complete with broken exterior lighting and derelict security fencing. Locals may assume they are wandering near forgotten relics from mid-century defense projects. Yet, whistleblowers argue, the interiors house modernized control decks, magnetic arrays, and medical containment units. Former employees describe unmarked patrols circling these areas, while motion sensors on perimeter fencing remain powered and alert. None of this has been independently verified, and both skeptics and program sympathizers warn that the temptation to exaggerate is strong within this arena. What remains clear is the consistent pattern of masking any operational hub behind an outward shell designed to mislead casual observers. Some of the most provocative claims focus on a Central Asian installation labeled publicly as a communications or weather monitoring outpost. Whistleblower documents describe an immense underground chamber large enough to manage platoon-level deployments. Tall surface masts, often assumed to be meteorological, are set instead to stabilize resonance fields below. If true, that would indicate a deliberate mismatching of surface and underground functions, obscuring an advanced framework beneath facilities that present themselves as ordinary scientific research sites. These allegations, however, face fierce criticism from analysts who view them as narrative embellishments not supported by open data. The credibility of these accounts remains deeply contested, splitting audiences into believers and skeptics. Supporters argue that the consistency of multiple independent testimonies across time suggests a core of truth. Critics counter that without satellite passes showing excavation, procurement logs directly tying government inventories to these facilities, or authorized site inspections, the claims cannot rise above speculation. It is important to remind ourselves that these are, at present, allegations. Independent confirmation is elusive, and in some cases entirely absent from the public record. Even so, communities living near rumored hubs occasionally report disturbances inconsistent with official explanations. Families around the Nevada site mention rhythmic tremors rattling glass panes every few nights. Climbers in Norway describe muffled turbine sounds emanating from beneath ice sheets during periods of silence on the surface. Civil authorities attribute these to routine industrial or natural causes, yet public registers list no nearby power plants or factories. Such fragments do not prove that portal operations persist, but they perpetuate suspicion and strengthen the perception that something concealed is unfolding underground. By the midpoint of 2025, analysts tracking open reports generally highlight 5 facilities as likely to remain active. The numbers matter less than the reported changes in oversight. Sources close to the program mention that every location now undergoes triple-layer audits, a practice designed to prevent catastrophic breach events from recurring. These checks extend across technical stability, external communications, and personnel discipline. Observers describe stricter security protocols, extended sign-in routines, and tightly compartmentalized staff navigation within the sealed areas. If accurate, this indicates increased scrutiny following the earlier facility losses, suggesting that rather than scaling down, the infrastructure is adapting to avoid collapse. The outcome is a picture filled with tension. At the surface, muted structures that look derelict. Behind the walls, the suggestion of active machinery and reinvigorated auditing regimes. Conflicting data and disputed testimonies leave us with fragments, not certainties. But across nearly every account, one pattern emerges: resources and manpower continue to funnel into these hidden complexes, whatever their precise purpose may be. And as focus sharpens on the walls and protocols of these guarded networks, another question begins to surface, one that goes beyond concrete shafts or sealed doors. What does it cost, both financially and humanly, to train the people meant to survive inside them? Training shifts and skyrocketing costs. Observers say the steep rise in costs has less to do with equipment or logistics, and more to do with the way recruits are prepared. Insiders describe training budgets spiking dramatically in recent cycles, exact totals remain classified and officially unverified. For years, the emphasis was on physical conditioning, altitude work, survival drills, maintaining strength under harsh temperatures. But 2025 brings a decisive pivot. Today the focus lies less on endurance and more on the mind, with full systems built to test how recruits endure sensory and psychological strain. According to whistleblower training accounts, missions are planned months in advance, and candidates spend that period in an escalating series of regimented preparations. High-altitude conditioning, equipment drills, group cohesion exercises, and long nights inside simulation chambers meant to bend their perception. The simulations themselves are not casual VR setups. They are multi-sensory immersion chambers built to overwhelm all the major inputs of the body. Lighting arrays distort depth perception, sound systems feed dissonant signals, and controlled breathing atmospheres raise or lower oxygen levels to unsettle the body's rhythm. Whistleblowers describe these as adaptive environments that merge physical discomfort with cognitive disorientation, pressures engineered to mimic the unpredictability of what operatives might encounter beyond the portals. The goal, officials say, is not to build muscle memory, but psychological acceptance of the unreal. Early reports suggest that trainees can last only a few hours in certain conditions before confusion sets in. What defeats them is rarely physical fatigue. Instead, it is the mind's rejection of contradictory signals. Accounts from inside the programs point out that psychological overload is now the leading cause of attrition. Groups of recruits have abandoned simulations when the projected sky seemed to bend unnaturally or when environmental sounds entirely vanished. The nervous system reacts as if the peril is genuine. Even when rationally, the recruits know they still stand in a sealed chamber. These responses leave lingering effects: migraines, sudden blackouts, days of dizziness, and in some cases lingering detachment from everyday surroundings. One description records trainees sleeping restlessly, waking convinced the simulation had not ended. Instructors note that physical stamina rarely breaks a candidate, sensory contradiction does. Each breakdown forces repetition. When an operative fails to adapt, the module restarts, systems recalibrate, and engineers flood back in to stabilize the settings. Chambers require large amounts of power, constant oversight, and recalibration between attempts to maintain useful data. These resets pile up into weeks of time swallowed by controlled environments. According to contractor leaks, the cost drains are not uniforms, quarters, or rations. They are these long stretches of simulations intended to approximate alien worlds within sealed laboratories. For every candidate progressing smoothly, another lingers, stuck repeating scenarios again and again, until staff are forced to decide whether to pull the plug or sink more hours into the attempt. The scope of these simulations is also broadening. Past cycles restricted training to terrains already mapped or at least glimpsed by earlier missions. Now scenarios include unverified worlds built entirely from prediction, atmospheres rich in plasma storms, environments without sound, or unlit expanses where vision fails. Officials argue that the program must prepare operatives not only for the proven, but for the plausible. In practice, this means months of exposure inside constructed environments no human has ever physically seen, conditions created solely from probability models. The effect is longer immersion, longer recalibrations, and longer periods of exposure for those already struggling with sensory stress. The ripple effect is clear. Where earlier intakes saw recruits cycle through in 4 or 5 months, insiders attest that current intakes frequently extend past 9. Prolonged immersion keeps simulation chambers occupied, requiring around-the-clock monitoring and engineering support. Teams of technicians track neural activity in real time to prevent lapses from causing lasting harm. These facilities cannot rest on standby. Every machine must run continuously while candidates remain inside. The result is a bottleneck. As one group overstays due to repeated failures, a new cohort waits idle, increasing pressure on schedules and budgets alike. The strain on participants is equally visible. In many training sequences, whistleblowers describe dropout rates higher than half before recruits reach advanced sessions. Candidates who excel at physical performance still collapse when senses contradict one another. One recalled standing on a stable platform that shifted visually into void below their feet, a moment that triggered a panic spiral. Others broke during chamber silences, when all sounds ceased and the absence became unbearable. Each washout converts into wasted months of preparation and resources. In response, officials mandate psychological evaluations, grounding exercises, medication to stabilize equilibrium, and counseling after simulations to bring participants out of dissociation. None of these measures come cheaply. Inside the bureaucracy, these problems are producing administrative reshuffles. Leaked documents suggest budgets once allocated for gear acquisition have been redirected to sustain prolonged training cycles. Contractors supplying sensory immersion technology are reportedly among the few groups benefiting, their revenues swelling with every added module or extended runtime. Meanwhile, mission gear acquisition delays have begun to worry operational planners. The irony is clear. Recruits are enduring months of simulated alien terrain without certainty that the equipment intended for real deployment will be ready when needed. The financial disclosures available to outsiders remain partial, but observers consistently emphasize unsustainable trends. Training insiders say per-candidate preparation now represents an extraordinary burden on available resources. While the exact figure cannot be confirmed, specialist estimates compare the investment per operative to assets like advanced aircraft, an extraordinary ratio when attrition erases so many candidates before they near operational service. Critics argue that the program risks collapsing under its own expenditure once losses mount past a sustainable threshold. Supporters respond that risk demands investment, that portal missions carry stakes beyond conventional metrics, and that the technology and expertise involved require substantial budgets to avoid catastrophic missteps. Psychological readiness is not the only new concern. Whistleblower accounts describe elaborate post-mission quarantine measures now integrated into training and acclimation cycles. Personnel undergo decontamination through chemical scans. Reports mention ethylene oxide and mandatory 2-week isolation periods on return. Though loosely aligned with health security, skeptics see these procedures as further evidence that program designers anticipate destabilization, not just in environment, but in personnel themselves. The addition of these steps deepens both costs and the sense of unease among participants who see firsthand how far the program is willing to isolate its own operatives. Taken together, the shifts portray a training pipeline that has traded familiar models of strength and endurance for something harder to quantify. Recruits now wrestle with distortions of sound, vision, and balance, all while being monitored for neural collapse or dissociative breaks. The strain is immense, the expenses are opaque, and the pressure grows as candidates are held longer inside simulations few of them complete intact. The process continues because operational planners insist that only those hardened by psychological dissonance have any chance of functioning beyond the portal threshold. It leaves one lingering issue not recorded on any budget ledger: the scarcity of individuals able to meet the new standard. Costs may rise and simulations multiply, but what happens if only a small fraction can withstand the mental punishment required to carry the mission forward? That question leads directly to the deeper mystery. Who exactly is capable of shouldering this burden in the first place? Inside the teams, who gets chosen and why? Inside the units that still venture into portal space, the question is no longer what machines can do, but who can survive within them. Recruitment has narrowed to a rare type of candidate, and the criteria extend well beyond strength or education. What defines a viable operator now is mental stability under distortion, an ability not just to endure pressure, but to keep functioning when reason itself begins to warp. Insiders emphasize that this is not something measured in courage or willpower. It is assessed through dense layers of neurological and psychological screens, each designed to expose whether the nervous system can remain intact while confronting environments that alter normal sensory logic. Only a small minority pass these tests, and those who do often carry permanent doubts about whether their minds will remain whole after service. Team slots are scarce because the pool of people able to withstand these conditions is vanishingly small. Whistleblower accounts describe the typical mission roster as tight teams of 6 or 7 people, a structure echoed consistently across testimonies. The makeup is deliberate: a multi-skilled medic, security personnel trained well beyond weapons handling, and scientists tailored to the mission's specific objectives. The medic is tasked with conditions no conventional hospital prepares for: injuries caused by pressure shifts, neural shocks, or chemical exposure in unfamiliar atmospheres. Their kit is small, each tool required to serve multiple roles, and their judgment often substitutes for an entire emergency ward. Security personnel, by contrast, extend their role into psychological steadiness. They are cross-trained in field stabilization and behavioral intervention, called upon to guard both bodies and fragile states of mind when panic threatens to spread. Mission scientists fill the remaining seats, and their role is less theoretical than it might sound. Atmospheric specialists recalibrate breathing systems in minutes when air density or composition shifts without warning. Geologists or engineers assess ground integrity under alien materials and recommend rapid reroutes when terrain threatens collapse. Others may profile unfamiliar organic life or decode structural anomalies. There is no time for laboratory analysis. Every observation must turn immediately into survival practice. This is not the slow accumulation of knowledge. It is expertise applied within seconds before conditions overwhelm them. The preparation for this level of cooperation takes months, and rapport is treated as a structural requirement. Every candidate is profiled in advance, not for discipline or skill alone, but for the signals they produce under mounting stress. In controlled environments, teammates are taught to read one another's breathing rhythms, facial tension, and speech cadence. Knowing the difference between hesitation caused by planning and hesitation caused by oncoming breakdown becomes the difference between mission continuity and disaster. Whistleblower testimony stresses that this behavioral synchronization is what binds the group more tightly than ranks or titles. Without it, the team cannot stay aligned once the portal destabilizes their shared frame of reference. Accounts of the selection process make clear just how narrow the filter has become. Out of the hundreds of applicants coming forward, only a small fraction navigate the neurological and psychological gauntlet. Most who fail would be perfectly capable soldiers, scientists, or medics in any other posting. Yet inside chambers designed to replicate unstable dimensional conditions, their brain activity spikes into dangerous irregularities. Hallucinations, panic responses, and shutdowns emerge before training even reaches full intensity. Those candidates return to conventional service or are discharged altogether, often carrying the stigma of failure in an ordeal few understand from the outside. For those who remain, the program has added a new safeguard, the cognitive anchor. Introduced in recent cycles, this role is neither symbolic nor secondary. Anchors are selected solely for their steadiness of perception. Unlike other teammates, they are trained almost entirely in group stabilization techniques. Their presence is designed to keep the unit intact when panic begins to spread. Whistleblower interviews describe anchors as individuals who can intervene subtly, adjusting tone of voice, offering grounding gestures, or simply refusing to mirror fear when others unravel. In unstable dimensions, researchers found that psychological collapse spreads faster than any physical threat. Anchors operate as circuit breakers against those cascades. This adjustment has already reshaped outcomes. Reports attribute a noticeable drop in mission casualties linked to breakdowns since anchors were formally integrated into rosters. On paper, they appear indistinguishable from armed personnel, but their training is singularly focused on steadying the team's psychology in real time. Without them, losses in earlier years mounted quickly once one member succumbed to fear. With them, units gain an invisible axis around which to regroup. Anchors are described in testimonies as rare to the point of anomaly. Finding one suitable candidate often requires dozens of screened volunteers, and only a handful make it through conditioning. The figures are not public, but insiders emphasize their scarcity and critical value. Beyond people, some of the most consistent testimonies highlight the use of trained canines. Dogs accompany certain missions, equipped with protective goggles, or even specialized suits containing their own breathing systems when conditions demand it. Whistleblowers describe them as indispensable sensors, able to detect frequency changes, shifting mineral traces, or seismic tremors before human equipment signals the alert. In one recorded interview, an operative recounted that the team depended on a dog's sudden agitation to recognize the signs of an oncoming geological event, allowing them to retreat before collapse. Observers noted that handlers interpret not just the dog's biological cues, but also the reassurance it brings to human teammates. Seeing a calm, responsive animal under conditions where human senses falter reinforces trust that survival remains possible. The selection and integration of animals carry their own routines, with each dog trained for months to navigate protective gear and respond to signals invisible or inaudible to the rest of the unit. Helmets fitted with thin film stabilize visual distortion, and respirators provide safe breathing in compromised atmospheres. These details, confirmed by whistleblower testimony, illustrate that the program extends specialization to every participant, human or otherwise, to gain any possible margin against unpredictable environments. For the teams, the canine presence is not only a practical advantage but a psychological anchor of its own, an element of constancy when every other variable shifts. Taken together, the current team structure in 2025 resembles a careful lattice of specializations and rare psychological profiles. Every position is tailored for multiple contingencies, from medics improvising medicine to scientists turning instant observations into life-saving adjustments. Yet the bonds that hold these groups together are less tangible. Anchors to stabilize unraveling minds, handlers reading the signals of trained animals, or unspoken trust built during months of pre-mission conditioning. Without cohesion, the specialized roles collapse into disconnected efforts. With cohesion, even impossible landscapes become survivable for long enough to gather data or return. This configuration raises a broader perspective. The most advanced technology in these missions is not the portal hardware itself, but the composition of the people and animals trusted to walk through. The structure reflects fragility as much as capability, demanding operatives whose rarity makes them more resource than expendable asset. It demonstrates how perilous the assignments remain and how tightly survival depends on the integrity of the group. What those teams face once they step through is another story altogether. Accounts from recent missions suggest they are not encountering simply wilderness or empty terrain, but settings far more structured and consistently more puzzling than earlier reports had prepared them for. New destinations beyond Earth. New destinations recorded in 2025 illustrate how the Portal program continues to press its reach outward. Instead of returning to familiar coordinates, mission teams describe stepping into domains more hostile and less comprehensible than many had been prepared for. What emerges from these accounts is a tension similar to earlier phases of the program, unstable terrains paired with the promise of strategic value. In each case, the surroundings are volatile, forcing early termination of missions. Yet the very existence of these locations raises questions about why they are pursued despite the escalating human cost. One mission testimony, coming directly from Emery Smith's interview material, describes a planetary environment that operatives later referred to as a desert world. The place appeared barren at first glance, yet its most striking feature was a shifting sky that changed color abruptly, violet one moment, then a pale green without warning. According to the account, the landscape held scattered lakes, but these lakes glowed from within. The water shimmered as though lit by countless thin chemical rods, bioluminescent and restless, with waves that never stilled. Surrounding trees and plant life reflected that glow, their surfaces marked with iridescence that made them shimmer at the edge of vision. Such details suggest both beauty and hazard. The same features that fascinated operatives caused unease as their senses struggled to interpret what they were seeing. The mission was not free of danger. Geological instability presented itself constantly. Tremors shook underfoot, sometimes subtle, sometimes sharp enough to disrupt equipment calibration. In one account, a team member misjudged a section of ground, stepping onto what appeared solid but fractured beneath their weight, sending them toward a cliff edge. Precautions had been taken to reduce such risks. Teams deployed robotic probes to test soil, atmosphere, and chemical content in advance. Yet even with constant scans, the possibility of sudden collapse or injury remained high. Injuries in these contexts typically ended the mission immediately. The danger of further destabilization was considered too great. For those inside the program, such outcomes were expected rather than avoidable. The environment itself was unreliable, and safety only conditional. Particular attention was given to the sensory contradictions this world seemed to create. Sky shifts disoriented orientation markers, sometimes confusing navigation units into registering false vectors. The glowing lakes, instead of serving as landmarks, created optical illusions that bent perspective across the horizon. Reports of nausea were common, with recruits describing equilibrium loss even when standing still. The overall effect was an environment that undermined human perception as much as it threatened them physically. Smith emphasized in his testimony that no sites encountered through portals ever displayed long-term stability, and this desert bioluminescent world seemed no exception. Like earlier missions, there was no guarantee that the same coordinates would resemble the same terrain in future returns, forcing planners to treat each entry as potentially unique. Beyond that testimony, discussion within the community and in circulating leaks points to other alleged environments, though these remain unverified. Some reports reference a location described as a vast crystalline plain, flat as though engineered and reflective enough to create disorienting echoes of both light and sound. Teams said to have visited their reported illusions that distorted judgment of distance and direction. Another set of descriptions identifies a phenomenon dubbed the spatial nexus, where space itself seemed to twist corridors into overlapping forms, making ordinary measurements meaningless. These particular claims have no independent confirmation and do not appear in the interview material from Smith. They survive only as anonymous testimonies or speculative accounts, and therefore have to be treated with caution. They represent how broad the range of portals could be, but remain outside the category of supported eyewitness detail. What ties the supported and speculative stories together, however, is instability. Whether from earthquakes under a methane-rich desert, or from alleged fractures spreading through fields of crystalline material, each account portrays a context where permanence cannot be assumed. For operatives, this instability undermines confidence in every step, reminding them that training only partially prepares the mind for realities that reconfigure themselves with little pattern. The psychological stress in these environments is as notable as the physical risk. Standing on terrain that might dissolve beneath you, or watching skies alter hue without cause, breaks the brain's expectation of predictability. That disruption eats away at decision-making strength, long before fatigue of the body sets in. Another point raised repeatedly in testimony is resource implication. The desert world yielded core samples that registered unusual densities of minerals, though public confirmation is absent. Analysts speculate that sites like this may contain rare or unusual materials of potential strategic value, yet those claims remain largely hypothetical. Still, what appears consistent is the idea that resource potential is the frame through which the program justifies repeated entries. According to insiders, analysts classify environments as strategically important when samples retrieved suggest concentrations outside Earth's ordinary range. Whistleblower testimony clarifies that public officials do not disclose data about these findings, so no independent assessment is possible. What is notable is that decision-makers appear willing to designate unstable worlds as priority targets, even when operatives report immediate hazards and psychological collapse. This dynamic makes sense from a strategic standpoint. If resources gathered in even small quantities show properties that scientists or defense planners believe are valuable, then the risk calculation shifts. Human safety becomes a variable, weighed against material advantage. Engineers argue that robotic systems could increasingly substitute for human teams in harvesting, provided controlled entry and exit remain viable. Critics respond that the presence of trained personnel inside still plays an irreplaceable role. Actions and observations real-time in alien contexts cannot yet be replicated fully by machines. That tension, between treating these missions as exploration versus treating them as extraction, permeates every account. From the operative's perspective, this divide is felt directly. They carry out missions where hostile terrain, shifting skies, and glowing lakes break down their equilibrium. Yet what returns through the portal is often only a sealed container of stone samples. Administrators mark these results with classifications and strategic tags, while the teams mark them with injuries, disorientation, or lingering psychological effects. The missions may continue to open doors to strange and unstable environments, but the measure of success internally remains tied to what might be taken back rather than what might be understood. This is the paradox these operatives live inside: unintelligible, unstable terrains paired with official recognition of strategic value. The desert world with its bioluminescent lakes is remembered in testimony for its colors and nausea, not for any miraculous discovery. Yet for officials, it becomes a coordinate worth holding, its potential resources deemed more critical than the cost weighed in psychological strain or physical risk. For the public, no disclosure exists that explains why tremors rattle towns near certain facilities. For insiders, the classification is clear enough. These destinations are not just landscapes reached through strange doors. They are assets stamped with urgency, their instability reframed not as deterrent, but as challenge worth meeting. As this unfolds in 2025, a contradiction defines the program's expansion. The further outward teams push, the more disorienting the environments become, and the higher the proportion of casualties and withdrawals. Yet resource speculation continues to drive prioritization. The results are painted as opportunity on paper, but the lived experience for teams cycling through is disconnection, vertigo, and trauma upon return. If worlds themselves resist permanence, The one thing consistent is the impact they leave on the people tasked with entering them. And this impact is not minor. Testimony makes it clear that after exposure to these destabilizing environments, many operatives hesitate to continue. The body may be cleared, the paperwork may affirm readiness, yet what begins to weigh heavier is the altered state of the mind. What follows when recruits return is not just recovery but confrontation with the ways perception itself has been changed, and whether stepping forward again is worth the weight it leaves behind. Psychological fallout and reintegration protocols. The strongest indication of the program's hidden toll is what happens after operatives return. A substantial share of first-time returnees decline repeat missions. Whistleblowers say this refusal comes even after candidates clear all the physical and neurological health checks that would normally certify them as ready for more. On paper they pass stress tests, cardiology scans, and reflex evaluations. But when asked to step forward again, they quietly refuse. Their reasons are not listed in official paperwork, but interviews and insider testimony provide a consistent picture. Persistent sleep disturbances, disorientation, nausea that lingers for weeks, and in some cases hallucination-like experiences that intrude into ordinary life. These are not injuries that show up on scans. They are internal distortions of perception that resist conventional diagnosis, and no amount of incentive has yet persuaded those individuals to return a second time. Recorded accounts emphasize the depth of this disruption. In one interview, a returning operative described lying awake for nights on end, unable to shake the shifting colors of the sky they had witnessed during deployment. The disturbance did not fade with distance. It replayed across their vision at unpredictable moments, even in a quiet room at home. Another account detailed sudden echoes of voices, as if snatches of mission dialogue persisted on loop despite silence. Sometimes the memories were not even of recognizable terrain, but fragments of corridors bending back on themselves or lights that mapped impossible angles across the sky. These reports resembled dissociation rather than battlefield trauma, and whistleblowers consistently frame them as sensory interference impressed into the nervous system by the environments themselves. Whistleblower testimony also describes more ordinary, but no less debilitating symptoms. Constant nausea after return, vertigo strong enough to collapse balance during routine walking, and visual distortions that cause familiar spaces to tilt around the individual. The description of nausea aligns directly with the known testimony regarding destabilizing environments, such as color-shifting skies on desert-like worlds. When events of that kind repeat without context, the result is a life in constant disequilibrium. Insiders argue that these aftereffects represent not just stress, but an imprint from environments that resist human sense entirely. Once that imprint exists, normal frameworks of space, time, and sound fracture. Attempts to counter these conditions have shifted drastically in recent years. Earlier models emphasized rest, decompression leave, and confidential counseling conversations. But by 2025, the growing wave of destabilized operatives appeared to overwhelm that system. Accounts now describe extended mandatory isolation and medical monitoring for anyone showing significant symptoms after return. Whistleblowers note durations ranging from a strict 2-week quarantine in basic cases to several months in more severe ones, with some unverified accounts reaching up to 90 days. These time frames remain disputed and are not supported by official recognition. In testimony, the isolation quarters themselves are presented as sparse. Stripped interiors, no sharp objects, restricted family contact, and constant monitoring of sleep cycles and body movements. The intent, according to program handlers, is risk management, reducing the chance that destabilized operatives inadvertently spread their symptoms or experiences into public view. Critics see the isolation differently. For them, it represents displacement of trust. In the past, counseling meant disclosure. Words became transcripts, and transcripts sometimes contradicted official narratives. Today, words are minimized, replaced with biometric readings and behavioral data points. One whistleblower remarked that an operative can sit in silence for hours, but each still leaves behind a stack of charts. The lived experience disappears into statistics. The human voice, once central to therapy, has been systematically cut out. Part of the reintegration process involves technology, said to be designed specifically to counter dissonance. Whistleblowers describe one such mechanism as a cognitive decompression chamber. Outwardly unremarkable, a sterile room with modular lighting and sound, The chamber reportedly uses pulsed arrays of frequencies and light patterns intended to steady perception. Operatives remain inside for hours at a time, emerging either calmer or deeply unsettled. Success is inconsistent. Some report temporary restoration of balance, as though the chamber layers one pattern of sensory input over another until disorienting impressions lose intensity. Yet the reprieve rarely lasts. Hours later, visions recur. Sleep fractures into fragments. The ground underfoot tilts again. Failures of this intervention appear common. Entire groups have cycled through repeated sessions without improvement. Some emerge worse, unable to emotionally connect, their expressions flat, their voices reduced to monotone. Whistleblowers liken it to stripping away more than memory, hollowing out personality itself. Families struggle with reintegration when returning service members no longer seem recognizable. Testimony even records instances of collapse inside the chamber. Sudden seizures and forced extractions when neural patterns destabilized further under treatment. For some, the cure presented greater danger than the condition. Why the chambers cannot provide durability remains a central question. Scientists consulted in testimony often compare the aftereffects of portal travel to altered states of consciousness documented in studies of trance. Once neural pathways shift under those altered modes, they may not fully return to baseline. The comparison highlights the challenge. Training can fortify muscles and breathing, but the brain's architecture, once reconfigured by exposure to environments outside familiar physical law, retains the mark. Whistleblowers recount that the impression is indelible. Efforts to erase or cover it create dullness rather than healing. It is as if reality itself imprinted onto the circuitry of awareness. For program administrators, this reality creates a cycle. Each new mission yields additional operatives requiring confinement and monitoring. The resources retrieved, stone samples, soil cores, or atmospheric readings, are tangible, but the cost measured in lost human capacity is mounting. In closed reports cited by witnesses, reintegration consumes more staff hours than preparation. More time is now spent stabilizing returnees than training new entrants. The net effect is an enterprise heavy in data but light in reusable personnel. The refusal of further missions is not open protest, but an instinctive line that operators draw after living with distortion for weeks on end. This cycle also reveals a fracture in priorities. Administrators focus on retaining strategic value, materials or knowledge that justify continued exploration. Operatives focus on survival of identity. The gulf between those objectives grows wider with each year. Families receive individuals who may pass medical clearance, but who cannot rejoin daily routines without constant oversight. The invisible fracture inside them does not mend with compensation or rest. It leaves them not warriors scarred by combat, but individuals living inside overlapping realities, uncertain which one is permanent. Whistleblowers close to these cases stress that the system as designed is reactive at best. Decontamination protocols, chemical cleansing with agents like ethylene oxide, and confinement only slow the onset of deeper instability. They do not resolve it. The expectation inside the program is not recovery but management, slowly rotating destabilized personnel back into ordinary life while recruiting replacements to meet quotas. It may appear efficient on paper. In lived practice, it is exhaustion cycling downward through every level of participant, trainer, and family network. The persistence of psychological fallout confronts observers with a deeper realization. Physical danger during missions is visible: falls, fractures, atmospheric collapse. But the interior danger, the fraying of perception over time, is both harder to see and far more difficult to extinguish. Whistleblowers say the administration treats it as manageable risk. Yet every report of nausea turning into vertigo, or sky echoes replaying weeks after return, raises the question of whether the risk has already exceeded any meaningful safeguard. It is against this backdrop that the next dimension of the story becomes crucial. Once operatives describe entire teams unraveling psychologically, attention turns to the tools meant to prevent breakdown at the source. Reintegration focuses on aftermath. But what measures, if any, are taken before or during missions to contain the threat? And what happens when protective systems themselves fail? Safety protocols after fatal incidents. Some internal audits, said to have leaked from operational reviews in 2025, are claimed to show double-digit incident rates during portal missions. These figures have never been officially verified, but whistleblower testimony points toward a consistent theme. Far too many assignments end with crews destabilized, sometimes physically, often neurologically. The incidents described are not superficial wounds. They involve full loss of motor control, sudden speech collapse, seizures, or days of sensory confusion that no standard medical screen can predict. Each entry brings a chance that reality itself will leave an imprint. Those who speak about these problems inside the program debate whether they are an inescapable price of exploration or evidence that the protections provided are not meeting the demand. In the aftermath of several high-profile injuries, administrators authorized the deployment of new protective gear. Whistleblowers described them as pressurized suits, lighter than earlier prototypes but lined with multiple composite layers designed to stabilize temperature and shield against radiation. Integrated telemetry runs constantly from suit to command, so that data on stress spikes, circulation, and breathing irregularities feeds in real time to supervisors. Operatives report that just glancing at their sleeve panels reveals live readouts. The same information appears simultaneously on control boards back at the hub. The intention is to track body systems second by second and to spot collapse before it escalates inside the field. Helmets are said to have received the most design attention. Recent models are described in accounts as hexagonal in shape with reinforced edges, using adaptive films to stabilize color distortion and filter sudden light shifts. These helmets recycle air on sealed systems, allowing operatives a controlled environment no matter what gases lie beyond the portal. Whistleblowers also mention internal shielding calibrated to reduce disorientation, though whether this constitutes an active neurological device or simply layered filtration is unclear. Some insiders speculate about subtle frequency modulation designed to counter environmental interference, but available testimony remains divided between specific, witnessed details and broader conjecture. Even with this equipment, limits quickly became clear. Helmets reportedly cracked under crystalline particle storms, and several operatives described the filters filling and clogging when exposed to thick alien particulates. Telemetry feeds sometimes spiked and froze mid-transmission, leaving command without accurate readings as operatives collapsed on the other side. In other cases, the suits themselves held, but the individual inside was overcome by vertigo so severe they could not stand. The gear, for all its advancement, has not proven decisive against unstable rift conditions. Each technical breakthrough is offset by the fact that no predictive system can fully capture environments which refuse to remain consistent across missions. It was against this background that safety doctrine itself reportedly shifted in 2025. According to whistleblower interviews and references to internal memos, a more conservative abort on injury procedure was adopted. The alleged change marked the first time that authorities instructed teams to treat a single severe incident as the trigger to exit immediately. Testimony describes it not as a publicized regulation, but as a rule conveyed directly through mission briefings. In prior years, objectives often proceeded even after an operative collapsed, on the rationale that essential data or samples outweighed the individual risk. Now, abrupt withdrawal is said to be the expectation when injuries pass a certain threshold. This policy shift has stirred its own disputes. Some insiders suggest it represents a genuine prioritization of human welfare in the face of incidents that risk spiraling into fatality. Others see it differently, arguing the move reflects a calculation aimed at minimizing numbers that might draw attention outside the program. According to these critics, by ensuring missions end quickly after the first injury, administrators reduce the total body count, making it easier to keep casualty figures obscured. Hard evidence for motives remains elusive, but the controversy illustrates how even inside the program, safety measures do not stand apart from political calculation. The consequences of this alleged protocol are clear in mission accounts. Some expeditions have been cut short within half an hour of entering. Teams extracted abruptly, carrying little scientific data, leaving materials behind, and forcing facility staff to schedule repeat attempts at the same coordinates. This creates an expanding burden across logistics, training, and readiness cycles. Systems must reset, portal thresholds must be recalibrated, and operatives cycle through multiple near-identical assignments to compensate for what could once have been achieved in a single entry. Safety gains are bought at the price of escalating program strain. The uncertainty arises over what precisely counts as serious enough to spark the abort order. Witnesses describe blurred boundaries. One operative shows slurred speech, another collapses briefly then recovers, yet the manuals offer limited clarity. Team leaders are tasked to judge in real time, under distortion, with consequences that affect not just survival but mission integrity. Extract too early, and the mission yields no result. Extract too late, and one stumble might become permanent breakdown. Predictable consistency does not exist in landscapes that twist and refold faster than manuals can define. Pre-mission protocols have also been expanded. Sensors now probe portal thresholds before human entry. Predictive models attempt to chart resonance waves and identify potential rifts seconds before crossing. Mission leaders sit through lengthy risk assessments, combing through data streams that attempt to resemble weather maps forecasting instability. Whistleblowers emphasize the limitations of this information. Scans can suggest clear passage, only for turbulence to erupt minutes later. The technology helps reduce the probability of disaster, but cannot remove it entirely. The unknown continues to resist containment. After missions conclude, facility guidelines expose another layer of tightened precaution. Recovered objects, whether mineral cores, environmental samples, or fragments of encountered technology, are sealed and quarantined as potential biohazards. Leaked material describes multiple contamination scares from earlier years, when equipment failed to screen out unstable particles. By 2025, the formal procedure dictates that protective suits exposed to questionable elements are incinerated outright. Airlock decontamination routines take hours before individuals are cleared to return. While families outside may never hear these specifics, inside the program they are treated as non-negotiable barriers between worlds. Taken together, the sum of new measures paints a picture both pragmatic and revealing. Lightweight pressurized suits with telemetry systems constantly feeding back to base. Hexagonal helmets adjusting to sudden brightness and filtering alien gas. Environmental scans run before teams set foot through a threshold. Abort on injury doctrines replacing the bravado of earlier mission years. Quarantine strict enough to destroy gear rather than risk contamination. On their own, each element looks precise, rational, and technically refined. Combined, they represent the clearest signal, yet that even insiders consider the risks spiraling faster than the tools designed to blunt them. Still, the target that appears in these alleged audits, a persistent rate of double-digit casualties, year after year, remains the anchor of every conversation. It underscores the gap between aspiration and reality. Technology continues to stabilize moment by moment, yet portals remain places where lives can unravel in seconds. Every new protective measure is cast in the shadow of what the data implies, that however carefully an environment is prepared for, some will return altered, and some may not return at all. By mid-2025, administrators present these protocols as proof of adaptation, but inside the program debate circulates over a deeper concern. Whistleblowers note that constant attention to suits, helmets, and abort thresholds distracts from the underlying nature of the portals themselves. The unpredictability is not merely a practical obstacle. It reflects forces that existing models cannot fully describe. As one insider said in testimony, the failures are not only about engineering shortfalls, they are reminders that the very structure of space being manipulated is not what the public imagines it to be. It is here, when accounts turn from immediate survival to the frameworks underpinning these gateways, that the most unsettling revelations begin to surface. Behind every protocol and every protective layer lies an unspoken recognition. The portals are not functioning as simple doors, and the risk to operatives cannot be separated from the way space itself is being reconfigured. The physics the public wasn't supposed to know. Some of the most troubling aspects of portal work are not about accidents or protective gear, but about the science that leaks suggest may underlie the entire system. The public has often been told these gateways are little more than doors, opened by advanced machinery, clean and precise like cutting a corridor into another place. Yet documents attributed to classified programs and testimony from insiders describe something far less straightforward. Proponents interpret these sources as evidence that opening a portal involves active manipulation of the geometry of space-time itself, sustained at great energy cost and vulnerable to collapse. Whether these descriptions are accurate or merely projections layered onto fragmentary leaks is a matter of deep dispute. Eyewitness accounts from those who claim to have observed the procedures are limited to operational effects and immediate hazards. They see teams vanish into shifting light, hear systems hum with unusual intensity, or experience the destabilizing aftershocks of resonance inside training chambers. These details align with the immediate senses, but do not explain the underlying physics. Parallel to those reports stand theoretical models developed in ufology and speculative physics circles. Thinkers such as Jacques Vallée or John Keel have long argued that what we call UFOs may in fact emerge from alternate dimensions closely aligned with our own, accessible through resonance rather than interstellar travel. Their work frames portals not as tunnels dug through space, but as bleeding edges between layers of reality that sometimes overlap or can be forced to touch. A third tier of interpretation comes from technical papers said to circulate in research labs. These are the most speculative, often shared without official authentication, and they suggest the engineering framework is neither a tunnel nor a window, but a kind of wound cut into space-time. The metaphor of carving appears repeatedly in testimony. In this frame, a portal remains stable only through active maintenance, the way one must keep pressure on a damaged surface to prevent it tearing wider. If the flow of energy fluctuates, the joining fails, and what remains is not a clear passage to a destination, but a rupture collapsing into instability. Critics argue this language reflects more metaphor than physics. Still, within the culture of leaks, it has persisted as the default shorthand. One concept often highlighted in reports is the unusual nature of the coordinates used to direct a mission. The public imagines a system akin to GPS, where longitude and latitude provide fixed points. Testimony suggests something far more complex. Coordinates presented as multi-layer signatures, integrating not just distance and direction but resonance markers, frequency modulations, and energy alignment factors. Whistleblowers describe operators working with diagrams resembling musical scores mixed with astronomical charts, as though plotting where to go required harmonizing notes as well as lines on a map. Officials have never confirmed such processes, leaving them squarely in the territory of unverified claims. The risks tied to this system are underscored in numerous accounts. Former participants describe incidents where teams emerged into environments hostile beyond survival, voids without atmosphere, terrains unstable within seconds of arrival, horizons folding with no consistent geometry. These spaces, sometimes called toxic voids in leaked reports, illustrate what happens when coordinate targeting slips off its intended resonance. Protective suits cannot compensate when there is no air or when gravitational fields fluctuate without pattern. Victims are often lost within moments, leaving no chance of retrieval once the resonance closes. Why so many failures occur remains an open question. Some observers argue that local environmental variables, power surges, seismic tremors, subtle radiation fluctuations, may sabotage delicate alignment processes. Others insist that the root lies not in equipment malfunction, but in an incomplete grasp of the physics itself. From this perspective, every casualty marks not a preventable accident, but a signpost pointing toward a universe structured by laws that human models have yet to capture. This tension defines much of the debate, whether better stabilizers could eventually render travel safe, or whether the very mechanism will always carry irreducible risk. Among those pressing for a new framework are theorists who have turned to resonance and harmonics as explanatory models. Inspired by earlier suggestions introduced by Vallée and Keel, some modern physicists speculate that portal systems tune themselves into gravitational wave harmonics, vast rhythms running through the fabric of reality. Earth vibrates within a spectrum caused by its mass, orbit, and relation to nearby celestial bodies. By forcing a system to resonate outside that spectrum, operators may intersect with entirely different structures. The idea frames destinations not as points marked on a linear grid, but as layers that vibrate in frequencies. When the machinery aligns with a particular vibration, a temporary connection opens. When it falters, the connection collapses. Even within those who propose it, this resonance model is emphasized as hypothetical. No public physics research verifies that such targeting is possible, and data demonstrating success remains classified if it exists at all. Yet the model lingers because it explains irregularities that eyewitnesses consistently report. Portals destabilized by cosmic events, environments shifting mid-operation, and sudden discharges that ripple through both equipment and human senses. If gravitational harmonics are truly involved, even distant solar events could send waves strong enough to throw off delicate alignments, meaning operators are tethered not only to their calculations, but also to an unpredictable cosmic rhythm stretching far beyond their control. Categorizing these accounts into levels helps sort what is documented from what is conjecture. At one end stand operational testimonies, the sensory experiences of those who go through or monitor the process. They describe color distortions, atmospheric collapse, tremors, equipment spikes, and disorientation. These details exist in interviews and transcripts available to the public, though stripped of technical context. At another level are models from ufology and speculative theory. Vallée's parallel worlds, Keel's interpenetrating dimensions, and resonant bridges. These theories organize the experiences but remain unverified frameworks. At the farthest end are the leaks and technical claims circulated in closed circles, multi-axis coordinate charts, triads of measurement, harmonic tuning beyond Earth. These are the highest tier of speculation, based on documents no one outside the system can inspect directly. Each layer builds a picture less of certainty than of gradation. What can be trusted are the testimonies and their consistencies. People emerging with disturbed equilibrium, accounts of teams lost to null environments, facility staff describing unexplained radiation spikes. What remains contested are the equations said to govern those outcomes. If the most daring hypotheses are right, portals are not doors at all but unstable alignments woven into the tremors of the universe. If they are wrong, the evidence still suggests that human beings are operating equipment that exceeds comprehension, at costs no one seems willing to acknowledge openly. The secrecy surrounding physics is not accidental. Acknowledging the fragility of these systems would force officials to admit that each operation risks catastrophic loss with variables beyond human influence. Framing the technology as sturdy and predictable persuades both operatives and the public that extraordinary dangers are under control. But inside the leaked material and testimonies lies a different picture. A science half-finished, architecture balanced on unstable foundations, outcomes determined by fluctuations no one can prevent. Signs of this fragility filter back into what can be seen with the naked eye. Returning operatives describe equipment straining under dimensional stress, or protective systems misinterpreting the very signals they are meant to confirm. Whether through helmets, suits, or monitoring systems, the physics pushes its load directly onto the bodies of those who risk passage. It is from these physical traces that the unverified theories gain their weight, because the distortions are plainly visible on the people who wear the gear. And around the operatives themselves, the instruments continue to record anomalies that refuse ordinary explanation. Classified gear revealed for the first time. For all of the uncertainty tied to how portals actually function, what is surfaced most concretely in testimony are the details of the gear itself. In 2025, several whistleblower interviews, including those of Emery Smith, gave the public its clearest description yet of what operatives wear and carry when stepping into destabilized worlds. These accounts don't describe bulky armor or futuristic exoskeletons. Instead, they point to gear specifically engineered for precise survival tasks. Thin, pressurized suits tailored to atmospheric stress, adaptive helmets designed to override sensory overload, and companion systems built to manage both humans and trained animals. According to Smith, the suits resemble a stripped-down astronaut shell, pressurized but not space-hardened. They are thinner, lighter, and oriented around air chemistry rather than vacuum resistance. Their purpose is to handle erratic atmospheres, high methane levels, unpredictable pressure drops, or environments where dense particulates overwhelm the lungs in minutes. Functionally, they seem like second skins, engineered to move with the body instead of encasing it. Woven channels regulate temperature. Embedded tubing manages breathing flow. Circuits hidden in fabric relay biometric signals without breaking the surface. From the outside, the effect isn't bulky protection but a body outline faintly glimmering under light, positioned halfway between clothing and hardware. Crowning these suits are the hexagonal helmets that Smith made central to his description. Earlier models, he explained, were heavy domes. By 2017, he said, slimmer variants had reached operatives, paneled exteriors that flex with the head and filter what the eye sees. The panels are important not just as shields, but as stabilizers against environmental tricks. During one mission, he recalled, a desert environment held skies that shifted color so violently from violet to green that operatives became nauseous within minutes. To counter this, the helmet deployed an interior film that locked the spectrum, fixing the view into a single stable hue. What appeared overhead outside was chaos, but inside the visor it flattened into something livable. That one adjustment, Smith said, saved missions from collapse. Without it, operatives would have dropped before collecting any samples at all. These helmets also recycle air on the fly. Intake is stripped of contaminating chemicals, rebuilt molecule by molecule. then returned to the user in oxygen ratios suited for their biology. If methane spikes rise suddenly, oxygen delivery shifts without manual fiddling. Operatives report that the constant hiss of the recyclers becomes the one steady sound across missions, the rhythm reminding them that biology is being curated moment by moment. Each inhale and exhale is essentially artificial, stabilized through invisible layers of chemistry. But testimony emphasizes that monitoring systems tucked inside both helmets and suits are as much liability as advantage. Whistleblowers say operatives complained about false alarms triggered in mid-mission. Monitoring software interprets spikes in heart rate as impending neurological collapse, even when all that happened was a surge of adrenaline. Alarms blare, the suit interface flashes crimson, supervisors at base order withdrawal, and the mission ends prematurely, not because of physical breakdown, but because sensors misread stress as disaster. Conversely, there are reports of the opposite. Monitors stay calm and green even as operatives whisper over radio that something is wrong, that their vision is tilting or balance is failing. This mismatch between lived experience and readouts has become one of the most pressing sources of distrust. One operative described watching a teammate wrestle nausea from color distortions while still displaying as stable on base commander screens, delaying assistance. The gap between what is felt and what is measured creates hesitation that can erode entire teams' confidence in their gear. Dogs, a recurring feature of testimonies, are protected by their own specialized equipment. Smith said canines wore oversized goggles resembling astronaut visors, shielding eyes from particulate and light distortions. In some accounts, suits for the animals extended to breathing harnesses, supporting them in environments where chemical levels spiked unpredictably. Their role was not symbolic but practical. Trained dogs could detect resonance shifts, soil tremors, or subacoustic anomalies faster than human instruments. But testimony stressed that officials outfitted them with almost the same level of protective care. Their sensory input was too valuable to risk loss. Beyond these supported details lie claims that remain contested. Some contractor leaks point towards smart fabrics, allegedly under prototype development, including fibers that can detect rupture and trigger self-sealing. In these accounts, tears made by dimensional friction, where field distortions stretch molecular bonds rather than cutting cloth, could close automatically, granting operatives precious time. Testimonies do not confirm this has reached field deployment, and Smith did not describe such technology directly. At best, sources speak of experimental fabrics still in testing. The concept remains compelling, but it stands apart, aspirational rather than evidenced. The gear also extends past wearables and into mission support devices. Robots accompany teams, equipped with probes that sample soil densities, scan air composition, and test ground stability before operatives advance. In one description, they served as tripwires against hidden instability, alerting ahead of quakes or sudden pockets of corrosive gas. Alongside them, special scanners wait back in decontamination facilities. Smith described rooms sterilized with ethylene oxide gas and frequency oscillators that eliminate microorganisms. After every return, nothing, fabric, tool, or living body, moves beyond those doors until readings confirm no alien contaminants remain. Even integrated at this scale, no piece of equipment acts alone. Helmets pass biometrics through the suit. The suit relays constantly to base command. Animal readings, robotic sensors, and human data stream together, producing an illusion of oversight. But as whistleblowers caution, illusions break. Failures in one node cascade into others. A helmet filter falters, nausea spikes, heart rhythms escalate, base interprets collapse, orders extraction, and a mission ends in seconds. Whistleblower accounts stress that this fragility continues despite the sophistication of design. The mission's viability often rests not in the strength of equipment, but in the stability of its readings, and in the judgment of individuals trying to interpret them. For operatives, the equipment is never optional. They pass through portal thresholds cloaked in layers that erase personal distinction. Translucent skins blending into helmet shells, animal goggles reflecting panel lights, mechanical sensors trundling ahead as scouts. Identity as an individual compresses into shared circuit loops. The operative's nerve signals, heart rate, and breathing curve all live now as colored lines glowing on command screens far away. The very boundary between body and machine collapses during mission entry. In Smith's telling, the blur was so complete that you could not tell where one ended and the other began. By 2025, This suite of gear represents both achievement and contradiction. On one side, thin suits designed to endure climates unfit for lungs, helmets with films that pin hostile skies into tolerable images, goggles for dogs that extend sensory reach, air recyclers that grant minutes of survival where no breathing air exists. On the other, monitoring systems that distort truth, alarms that push leaders to halt missions unnecessarily, overlooked signals that leave operators stranded. And in the background, whispers of aspirational fabrics, self-sealing, smart, capable of instant repair, still relegated to speculation. This mixed picture illustrates a point repeated through much of the testimony. Investment in equipment follows not just a path of engineering, but of politics. Decisions about what counts as safe enough, which prototypes move forward, and which failures are tolerated never stay within engineering wings alone. Every advance trickles upward, becoming ammunition in debates among those who control resources and access. And it is here that the focus begins to shift. Gear may determine whether missions succeed or fail, but the right to decide who wears it, and for what purpose, moves beyond the laboratory. Behind closed doors in 2025, the apparatus of survival itself is being weighed against strategic and geopolitical ambitions still hidden from public view. The political chessboard in 2025. Behind the closed doors of diplomatic meetings in 2025, reports suggest an entirely new kind of map is being sketched. Unlike the familiar maps of borders, oceans, or disputed territories, this one charts dimensional coordinates accessible only through portal systems. Analysts and whistleblower sources claim confidential agreements and joint survey arrangements are emerging. However, no public treaty text exists in the available record. What is described resembles treaties in style, but avoids any terms like territory or sovereignty. Instead, the papers make use of neutral technical terms, observation rights, survey allowances, spectrum access. Those who believe these accounts argue the meaning is clear. New frontiers are being discreetly divided in ways that echo earlier eras of colonial expansion. Several leaks have pointed to cases where unnamed nations allegedly signed confidential documents establishing joint survey rights. Officials have neither confirmed nor denied these allegations, but the notion itself has stirred debate. The logic presented by insiders suggests pragmatism rather than trust. If one state explores independently and fails, it risks losing resources and exposing secrets. Shared arrangements, by contrast, divide risk, provide dual access to data, and prevent a single state from monopolizing early findings. In theory, this prevents imbalance. In practice, it could also reinforce blocks of privilege, leaving smaller nations excluded. Analysts caution that since no verifiable treaty texts exist, the public cannot know whether such negotiations are stabilizing frameworks or simply a way of consolidating advantage behind closed doors. This strategic framing inevitably calls back to the Cold War. During that earlier rivalry, rocketry became both scientific curiosity and strategic weapon, and the space race followed. Scholars now argue we may be seeing the same cycle return. Competition masked as progress, secrecy driving mistrust, and technological breakthroughs fueling suspicion. The parallel is stark. Instead of uranium deposits or oil reserves, the contested assets now are rare isotopes and exotic minerals retrieved from unstable dimensions. If access and exploitation actually become feasible, strategic incentives could mimic historical colonial logics, a likely scenario analysts warn about, but this remains a projection rather than confirmed policy. What has surfaced strongly is the perception that portals are tools of advantage, not neutral experiments. The terminology used in these alleged agreements underscores this shift. Analysts who reviewed leaked passages note language about harmonic coordinates and survey blocks that seem designed to transform inaccessible regions into categories resembling spheres of influence. Unlike space treaties, long debated within the UN framework, reports on portal diplomacy remain opaque. Observation rights become bargaining chips rather than global trust-building protocols. Whistleblowers warn that in practice, whoever holds knowledge about valuable resonance locations may hold the power to reshape global markets. Control of information equals leverage. If such information were to be reserved for small groups of nations, it could fracture alliances and stir confrontations in much the same ways oil reserves have throughout modern history. Unlike first contact protocols debated in public, such as those highlighted by popular mechanics in discussions with SETI researchers, these alleged intergovernmental arrangements are opaque and kept from public oversight. At the scientific level, NASA and SETI representatives have emphasized that any detection of extraterrestrial biosignatures should be managed by broad, international dialogue. Yet if whistleblower sources are correct, political leaders are privately constructing agreements that exclude such openness. The contrast is severe. In theory, international contact scenarios demand inclusiveness and transparency. In practice, secrecy appears to dominate. This dissonance leads observers to worry that the wrong lessons of the Cold War are being repeated under a new guise. The most serious concern voiced by strategists is what happens when cooperation collapses into rivalry. If one nation suspects another of hoarding rare isotopes or weaponizing dimensional discoveries, mistrust accelerates. That mistrust, in turn, pressures governments into building rushed parallel programs, each portal ramped up as a kind of deterrent symbol, not unlike the nuclear stockpiles of the 20th century. The consequences could be stark. Scores of unstable experiments scattered across the globe, multiplying risks of accidents and breakdowns, simply to keep pace with imagined rivals. Whistleblowers warn this outcome is already possible in the absence of tangible oversight. Secrecy not only hides specific agreements, but also prevents checks on how many portals operate and how safely they are maintained. For civilian populations, this sealed environment creates additional risks. Citizens remain unaware of which coordinates are being partitioned, what resources are pursued, or under what conditions lives are being spent to retrieve them. Official denials shield ordinary oversight bodies, such as legislatures and parliaments, from examining decisions made in restricted circles. The result, according to several independent analysts, is a mismatch between accountability and action. From outside, the public sees only vague references to unexplained military budgets. From inside, classified groups treat entire dimensions as commodities to be traded. This separation leaves the public exposed to consequences without ever having access to the debate over causes. Internationally, the asymmetry grows sharper when smaller nations are left out of these alleged arrangements. Whistleblower commentary points to a repeating pattern. Large states manage exclusivity through joint access pacts, while other states inherit secondary status. Analysts compare this to established colonial hierarchies. Where valuable resources are concerned, exclusion almost always incubates instability. If repeated in interdimensional contexts, the outcome may be crises between blocs, resentment toward secret alliances, and escalation into covert interference. Already, researchers argue, the hunger for exclusive knowledge encourages espionage. Spying becomes as inevitable here as it once was when satellites and missiles were the prize. For some thinkers, the stakes extend beyond policy competition and reach into existential territory. Earth continues to strain under dwindling resources, environmental breakdown, and population pressures. If portal access genuinely yields rare energy sources or materials, the ability to control that supply will directly impact which nations cushion themselves against global stress and which do not. In this view, portal politics is no longer simply about who wins advantage, but about which societies survive crises. While this survival framing may amplify fears, it provides context for why secrecy persists. Leaders fear both rivals and publics realizing the scale of imbalances that could emerge. Skeptics, however, highlight an important caveat. None of these alleged pacts have been independently verified, and no public text establishes that such treaties exist. Narrators of this material must distinguish between confirmed international law, which still operates under established frameworks like the Outer Space Treaty, and alleged new arrangements described only in leaks and whistleblower stories. Without this clarity, it becomes easy to mistake warnings and projections for facts. For viewers, the responsible stance is to recognize where testimony ends and speculation begins, while still weighing the implications if the leaks are accurate. What emerges is not a neat picture of global unity, but a contested chessboard. Coordinates, not continents, function as tokens of power. Survey rights stand in for colonial claims. Suspicion feeds mistrust, mistrust feeds competition, and competition risks catastrophe, all under the cloak of silence. Whether such outcomes can be restrained remains unresolved. Independent experts argue that open international conversations about biohazards, first contact, and long-term governance are more urgent now than ever. If states continue working behind sealed doors, then the dangers extend beyond collapsed missions inside unstable dimensions. They reverberate directly into global stability here at home. And while these diplomatic maneuvers remain hidden, another truth presses harder on the conversation. Beyond secret treaties, beyond political rivalries, there is an unavoidable accounting that leaders cannot keep sealed indefinitely. The human cost of maintaining this system, measured in those who do not return from missions alive, is beginning to accumulate in ways that neither treaties nor secrecy can contain. Casualty numbers nobody can ignore. Casualty numbers carry a different kind of weight than technology, budgets, or politics because they confront the central issue that can't be disguised: human loss. For years, official reports have promised that portal missions remain under control, with fatalities described as rare and managed by improved safeguards. Yet whistleblowers and some insiders allege that official casualty statements significantly undercount losses. These claims remain unverified and are disputed in public discussions. Still, the persistence of those allegations forces attention back to the gap between what the public is told and what those inside the program describe. Government updates in 2025 continue to present a steady narrative of improvement. Public documentation frames mishaps as incident rates or system anomalies, language that suggests the accidents are mostly technical in nature and quickly corrected. This wording deflects from the human dimension of those incidents. Administrators insist the death toll is minimal, pointing to new safety measures and stricter abort on injury doctrines as signs that risk has been reduced. But in leaks and insider testimony, a different story circulates. Whistleblowers speak of missions terminated after sudden collapses, team members who never return, and situations where recovery is impossible once a portal destabilizes. Internal estimates vary, but the broad agreement among these sources is that the program's official narrative does not capture the full number of operatives lost. Families report that the explanations they receive after fatalities are often inconsistent, accounts that differ not only in wording but in substance. One family may be told their relative suffered an equipment malfunction, while another is told of a training mishap in sealed facilities, and still another hears of medical causes detached from mission realities. These examples surface in whistleblower testimony and family anecdotes, rather than independently verifiable documents. What unites them is the frustration of survivors who sense contradictions they cannot resolve. Bound by non-disclosure agreements signed at the time of enlistment, many refrain from pressing questions publicly. They are left to grieve under partial stories that invite suspicion without ever providing clarity. Inside the program, that pattern of silence has its own corrosive effects. Operatives train together for months, forging bonds under stress. When one member fails to return but no acknowledgement follows, no debriefings, no formal ceremony, the absence itself becomes impossible to ignore. Survivors are expected to move ahead with new recruits while watching teammates vanish from the record. Whistleblowers describe morale eroding as operatives internalize a simple truth: if they are lost, their families may never be given the full reason why. This awareness adds one more psychological burden to a system already known for high dropout rates and recurring trauma. The contested casualty estimates also fuel debates about the sustainability of the program. Government reports acknowledge injuries and neurological disruptions, but minimize reference to fatalities. Whistleblowers, meanwhile, have suggested that 2025 already shows an upward trend compared to the previous year. Independent analysts, piecing together fragments of testimony and budget data, speculate that if increases continue, the loss rate could eventually outpace training capacity. This projection is not a verified forecast, but a scenario observers believe is plausible. They argue that the arithmetic becomes unfavorable when every recruit requires months of training, yet many do not survive their first deployments. Whether the program can afford this imbalance becomes an open question if whistleblower accounts align even partially with reality. Meanwhile, official secrecy leaves those outside unable to verify either position. The gap between government statements and whistleblower claims persists without a means of arbitration. Civilian oversight proposals rarely penetrate the classified layers. Legislators, independent boards, and public scientists remain on the periphery, while all casualty reporting stays within the agencies that run the portals. This internal auditing raises consistent criticisms about conflict of interest. Supporters of the program argue secrecy is essential for national security. Critics counter that without independent review, numbers lose credibility regardless of whether they are accurate. Families of operatives carry much of the weight of this dispute. They live not in abstract debates, but inside the consequences: missing relatives, sealed caskets, medals awarded without clarity. Some families describe being issued gestures of recognition and compensation instead of clear explanations. The framing of loss as in service or incident response may soothe an official record but provides little closure for those left behind. The secrecy entrenches their grief, extending uncertainty across years. Testimonials suggest that this atmosphere of obscured information does not just harm individuals. It reinforces mistrust across the wider public whenever stories circulate through leaks and contradictions. Many of these accounts are, however, disputed. Some outlets portray whistleblowers as credible insiders risking much to reveal uncomfortable truths. Others challenge their reliability, suggesting a mix of exaggeration, misinterpretation, or deliberate disinformation. This division has generated both supportive and skeptical coverage across forums and media. For viewers, the responsible stance is to recognize that dramatic claims demand careful scrutiny, and that much remains contested in the absence of independently verified evidence. The difficulty lies in separating genuine reporting from speculation amplified through repetition. What is not in dispute is that questions remain unanswered. Independent researchers argue that, at minimum, the public deserves clarity on the scale of risk operatives face. Whether casualties measure in dozens or hundreds is not something that can remain unresolved indefinitely. The size of the training programs, the budgets allocated, and the sheer infrastructure behind portal operations are too significant to justify silence. Even within government frameworks, classified systems elsewhere in defense maintain external audit structures. Why not here? Critics ask whether secrecy around figures exists to protect security or simply to avoid accountability. For operatives themselves, the meaning of these numbers is immediate. Every mission carries the unspoken recognition that casualties may not be acknowledged realistically. Every training cycle produces new candidates who know the odds are difficult to measure and who may trust whistleblower leaks more than official briefings. It produces a paradox in morale. Operatives trained for loyalty and composure are simultaneously aware of how fragile their presence in the system may be perceived outside. They know the official narrative says casualty rates are low, but they experience absent teammates firsthand. Trust becomes strained in ways that protective equipment or improved procedures cannot repair. Unverified as they are, projections about casualty escalation point toward deeper questions for the program. Can a system continue to function if the weight of deaths becomes more visible than the resources it extracts or the science it achieves? Outside experts note that even rumors of unsustainable losses can destabilize support internally and politically, eroding confidence that the risks justify rewards. But whether the trend is escalating, stable, or exaggerated remains locked behind walls of classification. As long as only fragments leak, interpretation dominates where verification should exist. This dispute ultimately leaves one question hanging over the program that carries more power than any technical debate. If official casualty figures are contested, who should audit them? And how do you verify claims that live behind classified walls? That unresolved issue shifts the conversation away from technology and exploration and toward the cost of maintaining portals under secrecy. And it is in that cost itself, not simply what lies on the other side, that the next challenge emerges. What these debates ultimately highlight is the need for clearer accountability. We can't confirm many of the claims circulating in transcripts and leaks, but the combination of whistleblower testimony and plausible strategic incentive means these issues deserve careful scrutiny. Analysts stress that the most reasonable public demand isn't alarmism, but independent oversight and transparent safeguards. Given the magnitude of the resources involved and the risks described, only open review can separate exaggeration from evidence. This episode presents contested testimonies alongside analysis. We'll continue to follow verified documents and expert commentary as they emerge. If you want rigorous deep dives, comment with specific questions or evidence you'd like analyzed, and subscribe to follow our vetted updates.